My sister made me maid of honor and had me pay for her entire $30,000 wedding. Then I heard her tell the bridesmaids she only chose me for my money and I'm too ugly for photos. When I canceled every vendor contract in my name, she showed up at my house, trashed my living room, and created a GoFundMe, claiming I destroyed her life out of jealousy. When my younger sister Lisa got engaged last year, she made me her maid of honor. But instead of wedding styles, she texted me her bridesmaids' dress prices. Instead of wedding themes, she texted me her dream venue costs with smiley emojis. She ignored every question I had that wasn't, where do I swipe my card? And signed every planning email with, thanks for handling the payment. The pattern started early when Lisa claimed she was too overwhelmed with wedding stress to handle vendor contracts. So naturally, I put everything in my name and paid the deposit since she was my sister. Then she demanded I lose 15 pounds to not ruin photos while she sat there eating the expensive cake samples I paid for. At the dress fitting, she told the seamstress I looked like a cow in the maid of honor dress and made me pay extra for a more expensive one to minimize my bulk. Then she posted on social media about her charity case maid of honor, implying I was some desperate single loser she was doing a favor by including. Still, I thought she was just overwhelmed, and since I could afford it, I decided there was nothing wrong with treating my sister to her dream wedding. But then came the moment where she revealed her true intentions. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove to her apartment for the final planning meeting with all the vendor contracts tucked in my folder since I needed to make the final payments. I got there early and was about to knock on her door when I heard her on speakerphone with the other bridesmaids, and my heart dropped. Don't worry, I only made her maid of honor for the money. She'll probably ruin my wedding photos by being that ugly. Just looking at her pathetic face makes me sick. I'm dropping her as maid of honor soon, but she's so desperate for family approval that she won't even complain when I tell her. My hand literally froze on the doorknob. A few seconds later, when I'd calmed my breathing, I opened the door and Lisa's face shifted to fake sweetness the second she saw me standing there. Oh, hey, so I've been thinking, and you'd be more comfortable just attending as a regular guest, right? My wedding photos need a certain aesthetic. Hopefully you'll do just this one thing for your sister. I looked at her perfectly contoured face and felt something inside me snap clean in half. Of course I understand perfectly. I lied, told her I needed to process the change, and walked straight to my car while she kept smiling behind me. If she didn't want me to be there, then sure, I wouldn't be there. But neither would my money. The venue deposit was in my name, the photographer was on my credit card, and the flowers, decorations, and catering all had my signature because she'd been too busy to handle any of it. The cancellation policies all allowed full refunds if done 2 weeks or more before the event, and we had 3 weeks. And guess what? All the contracts were already in my hand. That afternoon, I went home and sat at my kitchen table with the contracts spread out like a deck of cards. My hands shook as I dialed the venue first, my voice steady as I explained there had been a change in family circumstances, and I needed my deposit returned immediately. The photographer, the florist, the decorator, the caterer, all confirmed cancellations and refunds since I'd given them 3 weeks' notice. With each call, I felt the weight of her words pressing on my chest and kept reminding myself why I was doing this. She'd used me, drained my bank account while telling people I was pathetic, and planned to humiliate me at the wedding I'd paid for. By evening, I'd reclaimed thousands of dollars and felt completely hollow. 2 days passed in silence while I waited for the inevitable explosion. When my phone finally rang with Lisa's number, I took a deep breath before answering. The venue says we don't have a booking. What did you do? The wedding is in 3 weeks. Nothing is booked. No photographer, no flowers, nothing. Her voice cracked with hysteria as reality sank in. I reminded her that I was a regular guest now, and guests shouldn't pay, so I had canceled everything. She went nuclear with sobs and screams about how I was a jealous psycho who had destroyed her life over nothing. Then she said I was uninvited to a wedding that wasn't even scheduled anymore. I started laughing, and she hung up. Our parents called, furious, but when I forwarded screenshots and explained what I'd overheard, their anger dissolved into uncomfortable silence. Well, that was when my sister decided to go nuclear. She said crew her wedding and started heading straight to where I was. I heard her car before I saw it, the familiar sound of her engine roaring down my street at twice the speed limit. My hands gripped the kitchen counter as I watched through the window. Lisa's white sedan screeched into my driveway, leaving tire marks on the concrete. She jumped out without even closing the door, her wedding planning binder clutched in one hand and her phone in the other. The pounding on my door started immediately, not knocking, but full-fisted blows that rattled the frame. I counted to 10, then 20, trying to steady my breathing. Through the peephole, I could see her face contorted with rage, mascara already running down her cheeks. I opened the door just as she raised her fist for another assault on it. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the doorframe. The binder fell, scattering papers across my porch. Wedding inspiration photos, vendor lists, and fabric swatches scattered in the wind. She pushed past me into my house without invitation, her heels clicking on my hardwood floors. I followed her to the living room where she spun around, her finger jabbing at my chest. Her mouth moved rapidly, words tumbling out about deposits and contracts and how I'd ruined everything. I kept my expression neutral, letting her exhaust herself. When she finally paused for breath, I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. She followed, still ranting. I sipped slowly, watching her pace back and forth across my kitchen like a caged animal. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone, blonde strands sticking to her tear-stained face. She grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. I set down my glass carefully and removed her hands. She tried again, this time attempting to push me against the refrigerator. I sidestepped, and she stumbled into the counter. The fruit bowl wobbled but didn't fall. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up and her face went even paler. I could guess what she was reading, probably another vendor confirming the cancellation. She threw the phone at the wall. It bounced off and clattered to the floor, the screen cracked but still glowing. She lunged for my purse on the counter, dumping its contents everywhere. Lipstick rolled under the stove, receipts fluttered to the ground, and my wallet landed near her feet. She grabbed it, frantically pulling out my credit cards as if they held some magic solution to her predicament. I picked up each item methodically, returning them to my purse while she waved my cards around. When I reached for them, she held them above her head like a child playing keep away. I simply walked to the living room and sat down, leaving her standing alone in my kitchen with my credit cards. She followed, throwing the cards at me. They scattered across the coffee table table. I collected them one by one, checking each for damage before returning them to my wallet. She watched, her chest heaving with each breath. Her phone rang from the kitchen floor. She scrambled to get it, nearly slipping in her heels. I heard her answering, her voice shifting to fake sweetness. Probably our mother. The conversation was brief. When she returned to the living room, her face had taken on a calculating look I knew too well. She sat across from me, smoothing her skirt and tucking her hair behind her ears. The transformation was remarkable, from wild-eyed fury to composed manipulation in seconds. She leaned forward, hands clasped as if in prayer. Her voice turned soft, apologetic. She talked about wedding stress, about how she hadn't meant those things she'd said, about how sisters should support each other. I watched her performance, noting how she kept glancing at her phone, probably calculating how much time she had to salvage her wedding. When tears didn't work, she switched tactics. She reminded me of childhood memories, of promises we'd made as little girls about being each other's maids of honor. She even pulled out her phone to show me old photos of us playing dress-up in our mother's wedding dress. I stood and walked to the window, watching the neighbors' kids play in their yard. She followed, still talking. Her reflection in the glass showed her growing desperation. She was running out of tactics, and we both knew it. Her phone rang again. This time it was her fiancé. I could hear his confused voice through the speaker as she tried to explain why their venue was calling about the cancellation. She shot me a venomous look while crafting lies about a miscommunication and a technical error. After she hung up, the mask dropped completely. She grabbed a pillow from my couch and threw it at the wall, then another. I watched as she had her tantrum, careful to stay out of arm's reach. When she reached for my grandmother's vase, I stepped forward and took it from her hands, placing it safely on a high shelf. She collapsed on my couch, sobbing dramatically. Real tears this time, but not from sadness, from pure frustration that her schemes weren't working. I sat in the armchair across from her, waiting for the storm to pass. Her phone buzzed with text after text, wedding guests asking about the venue, her fiancé demanding answers, our parents trying to mediate. Each message seemed to fuel her anger more. She stood abruptly, stumbling slightly in her heels. She marched to my home office and I followed. She yanked open drawers, searching for something, probably hoping to find copies of the contracts. Lisa's behavior makes me wonder if there's something deeper going on here. The way she switches from rage to manipulation to tears feels like she's cycling through every trick she knows. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her rifle through my files. Tax returns scattered across the floor, old birthday cards fluttered like butterflies. When she found nothing useful, she turned her attention to my computer. She pushed past me to the desk, frantically clicking through my email. I reached over and calmly closed the laptop. She tried to open it again, and I unplugged it, tucking it under my arm. Her face turned an alarming shade of red. She swept everything off my desk. Pens, paper clips, a coffee mug that shattered on the floor. I stepped carefully around the ceramic shards and walked back to the living room, laptop still secure under my arm. She followed, now trying a different approach. She pulled out her checkbook, waving it at me. She promised to pay me back every penny, with interest. She even started writing a check, her hand shaking so badly the numbers were barely legible. I didn't reach for the check when she held it out. It fluttered to the floor between us. She wrote another, this time for double the amount. That one joined the first on the floor. By the fifth check, she was crying again, mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. Her fiancé arrived then, pounding on my door with the same violence Lisa had shown earlier. I could see his car parked crooked behind Lisa's, one wheel on my lawn. Lisa ran to let him in before I could move. He stormed in, still in his work clothes, his face flushed with anger. He looked between us, trying to understand the situation. Lisa immediately launched into her victim act, clinging to his arm and sobbing about how I'd destroyed their wedding out of jealousy. I stayed seated, letting her spin her tale. When she finished, breathless and teary, he turned to me for my version. I simply asked if he knew why Lisa had made me maid of honor. His confused expression told me everything. Lisa's grip on his arm tightened. She tried to steer him toward the door, chattering about needing to find new vendors, about how they could still salvage everything if they acted fast. He resisted, still looking at me with growing suspicion. I pulled out my phone and showed him my bank statements, the thousands I'd spent on deposits and planning. His eyes widened at the numbers. Lisa tried to grab my phone, but he held her back, asking her why her sister had paid for everything. The cracks in her story widened. She stammered about joint accounts and payment plans that made no sense. He asked to see her bank statements. She claimed her phone was dead, even though we'd all heard it ringing minutes before. He sat heavily on my couch, head in his hands. Lisa knelt beside him, rubbing his back and shooting me murderous looks over his shoulder. I excused myself to clean up the broken mug in my office, giving them space to talk. I could hear their voices from the other room, his growing louder with each question, hers becoming more shrill with each lie. By the time I returned with a dustpan full of ceramic shards, he was standing by the door, car keys in hand. He apologized to me before leaving, his disappointment evident in every line of his face. Lisa ran after him, her heels clicking frantically on my driveway. I watched from the window as they argued beside his car, her gestures growing more desperate as he pulled away from her touch. He drove off, leaving her standing in my driveway. She turned back to the house, her face a mask of pure hatred. I locked the door before she could reach it. She pounded again, screaming threats about lawsuits and police and family loyalty. I drew the curtains and started cleaning up the mess she'd made of my living room. Outside, her cries eventually faded to whimpers, then silence. When I peeked out an hour later, her car was gone, but the tire marks remained on my driveway like scars. My phone buzzed with messages from family members, each taking sides or demanding explanations. I turned it off and made myself dinner, eating alone at my kitchen table where just days ago I'd spread out those contracts and made the hardest decision of my life. As night fell, I double-checked all my locks and windows. I knew this wasn't over. Lisa had lost her wedding, possibly her fiancé, and definitely her control over me. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new manipulations, new attempts to break me down. But tonight, in my quiet house with her chaos finally gone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The kind that comes from standing up for yourself, even when it costs everything. Even when it means watching your sister reveal her true nature in all its ugly glory. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in my armchair, the same one I'd watched her tantrum from. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but tonight I was free. The morning brought exactly what I'd expected. My doorbell rang at 6:30, and through the peephole I saw my mother standing there with her arms crossed. Behind her, my father shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. I opened the door and stepped aside to let them in. My mother marched straight to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, her purse clutched in her lap. My father followed more slowly, his eyes taking in the scattered wedding photos still littering my floor from Lisa's tantrum. He bent to pick one up, studying it with a frown. I made coffee while they settled themselves. When I returned with 3 mugs, my mother had arranged herself into what I recognized as her lecture position. I handed them their drinks and sat across from them, waiting. My mother launched into a speech about family loyalty and forgiveness. She talked about how weddings brought out the worst in people, how Lisa was under tremendous stress, how I needed to be the bigger person. I sipped my coffee and let her words wash over me, noting how she carefully avoided mentioning the money I'd spent or the cruel things Lisa had said. When she finally paused, I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of Lisa's conversation with the bridesmaids. I'd started recording through the door when I'd heard my name mentioned, a habit from years of Lisa twisting my words. My mother's face went pale as Lisa's voice filled the room, calling me pathetic and ugly, laughing about using me for money. My father set down his mug with shaking hands. He stood and walked to the window, his back to us. My mother opened and closed her mouth several times, searching for words to defend her younger daughter. Finally, she tried a different approach, suggesting that Lisa hadn't meant it, that sometimes people said things they didn't mean. I showed them my bank statements next, the thousands I'd spent on deposits, dress fittings, cake tastings, and planning sessions. My father turned from the window, his face grave as he studied the numbers. My mother's defense of Lisa grew weaker with each receipt I produced. They left an hour later, my mother still making half-hearted attempts to broker peace while my father remained grimly silent. I knew they'd go straight to Lisa's apartment, knew my mother would try to fix this like she'd fixed every other mess Lisa had created over the years. The rest of the morning passed quietly. I cleaned up the remnants of yesterday's chaos, vacuumed the scattered papers, and tried to restore order to my home. Around noon, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Lisa had taken to social media. The first post appeared on her wedding planning group. She painted herself as the victim of a jealous sister who'd sabotaged her dream wedding out of spite. She claimed I'd stolen her deposits, destroyed her venue contracts, and ruined her life because I couldn't stand to see her happy. Within minutes, comments poured in from strangers offering sympathy and calling me horrible names. The next post went to her personal page, visible to all our mutual friends and extended family. This one included carefully cropped screenshots of our text conversations, removing all context to make it seem like I'd canceled everything without provocation. She tagged our cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, ensuring maximum visibility for her version of events. My phone rang constantly. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called demanding explanations. My Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister, left a voicemail calling me selfish and cruel. My Uncle Jonathan sent a long text about how disappointed he was in my behavior. Each message felt like another weight added to my chest. I spent the afternoon crafting a response. I compiled the full text conversations, the bank statements, and the recording of Lisa's cruel words. I wrote a detailed timeline of events, documenting every payment I'd made and every insult I'd endured. But when I went to post it, I hesitated. Did I really want to air our family's dirty laundry for everyone to see? While I debated, Lisa escalated further. She created a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Me Save My Dream Wedding After My Sister's Betrayal." The description painted a heart-wrenching tale of a bride left devastated by her jealous sister's actions. She claimed she needed $20,000 to rebook everything with just 2 weeks until the wedding date. The donations started immediately. $50 from a high school friend, $100 from a coworker, $25 from someone I didn't even recognize. Each donation came with a comment supporting Lisa and condemning me. My stomach churned as I watched the total climb. I finally posted my response, but it was too late. Lisa's narrative had already taken hold. My carefully documented evidence was dismissed as desperate attempts to justify my cruelty. People accused me of fabricating the recording, of manipulating the bank statements, of being a bitter spinster who couldn't handle her younger sister's happiness. That evening, Lisa's fiancé showed up at my door again. This time he came alone, looking exhausted. I let him in and offered him a beer, which he accepted gratefully. Well, nothing says family meeting quite like parents showing up at dawn with their disappointment preloaded and ready to fire. The recording trick was brilliant. Nothing cuts through parental denial faster than hearing their golden child's true voice on speaker. We sat in my living room in silence for several minutes before he spoke. He told me about the conversations he'd had with Lisa after leaving yesterday, how she'd changed her story multiple times, how the details didn't add up, how she'd finally admitted to making me pay for things but insisted it was because I'd offered. He asked to hear the recording again. I played it for him, watching his face crumble as he heard his fiancé's true feelings about me. When it ended, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked to see the bank statements. I showed him everything, including the receipts for the dress fitting where Lisa had humiliated me. He left an hour later with copies of everything. I didn't ask what he planned to do with them. That was between him and Lisa, but I could see in his eyes that something fundamental had shifted in how he saw her. The next morning, I woke to find my car had been vandalized. Someone had keyed long scratches down both sides and smashed one of the taillights. I stood in my driveway, staring at the damage, when my neighbor came over. She'd seen a car matching Lisa's description in the early morning hours, but hadn't gotten a clear look at the driver. I filed a police report, knowing nothing would come of it without proof. The officer took photos and gave me a case number for my insurance. As he left, several more neighbors approached, having heard about the vandalism. They offered security camera footage from their homes, and one had captured a partial license plate that looked suspiciously like Lisa's. While dealing with the insurance company, I received a call from the wedding venue. The manager explained that someone claiming to be me had called trying to rebook the original reservation. They'd been suspicious because the caller didn't know the confirmation number and had become aggressive when questioned. They wanted to verify that I hadn't changed my mind about the cancellation. I confirmed the cancellation was final and thanked them for checking. After hanging up, I called all the other vendors to warn them about potential impersonation attempts. Sure enough, the photographer and caterer had received similar calls. The florist mentioned that someone had actually shown up in person, claiming to be my assistant, but had fled when asked for identification. That afternoon, a process server appeared at my door. Lisa was suing suing me for the wedding costs, claiming I'd verbally agreed to pay for everything as a gift and then maliciously withdrawn my support. The lawsuit sought damages of $35,000 for deposits, emotional distress, and loss of matrimonial opportunity. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the legal documents. This was escalating beyond anything I'd imagined. I'd thought canceling the contracts would end my involvement, but Lisa seemed determined to destroy me for daring to stand up to her. I spent the evening researching lawyers, eventually finding one who specialized in family disputes. We scheduled a consultation for the next day. As I gathered my documentation, I realized I'd been unconsciously preparing for this possibility all along. Every receipt saved, every conversation documented, every cruel word preserved. My phone rang late that night. It was Lisa's fiancé. His voice sounded hollow as he told me he'd ended the engagement. He'd confronted Lisa with the evidence, and she'd finally shown her true colors, screaming at him about how he was ruining everything just like I had. He'd moved out of their apartment and was staying with friends. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, processing this development. Part of me felt guilty for the role I'd played in ending their relationship, but the larger part remembered Lisa's words about using me, about finding me pathetic, about planning to humiliate me. I hadn't forced her to be cruel. I'd simply stopped enabling it. The next few days blurred together. The lawyer reviewed my case and assured me Lisa's lawsuit had little merit given the documentation I'd provided. She helped me file a countersuit for defamation based on Lisa's social media posts and the GoFundMe fraud. We also pursued a restraining order based on the vandalism and impersonation attempts. Meanwhile, Lisa's campaign against me intensified. She showed up at my workplace during lunch, causing a scene in the lobby. Security had to escort her out while she screamed about me being a thief and a liar. My boss called me into his office afterward, concerned about the disruption. I explained the situation and provided documentation, but I could see the worry in his eyes. She began calling my friends, spinning elaborate tales about my supposed mental health issues and financial crimes. Some believed her, cutting me off without even asking for my side. Others reached out, confused by the conflicting stories. I spent hours on the phone explaining, defending, providing evidence. The GoFundMe page continued to grow, reaching almost $15,000. Lisa posted regular updates, each more dramatic than the last. She claimed I'd hacked her bank accounts, stolen her identity, and threatened her safety. The comment section became a cesspool of hatred directed at me. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. My cousin Nathan, who'd initially sided with Lisa, reached out privately. He'd been added as an admin on the GoFundMe to lend credibility, given his reputation in the family as trustworthy. But when he'd tried to access the funds to help Lisa rebook vendors, he'd discovered she'd already withdrawn most of the money. He'd confronted her, and she'd claimed she needed it for legal fees to fight me. But he'd done some digging and found charges for designer clothes, expensive dinners, and a weekend spa retreat. When he'd threatened to expose her, she'd removed his admin access and blocked him on all platforms. Nathan provided me with screenshots of everything, including the bank records he'd accessed before being locked out. We calculated that Lisa had spent over $8,000 of the donated money on herself while continuing to beg for more online. I met with my lawyer again, adding fraud charges to our countersuit. She was optimistic about our chances, especially with Nathan willing to testify. But she warned me that Lisa might become more desperate as the walls closed in. She was right. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My living room window had been shattered by a brick with a note attached. Drop the lawsuit or worse is coming. I called the police immediately, and this time they took it seriously given the escalation and prior reports. The security footage from my neighbor clearly showed Lisa throwing the brick, though she'd tried to disguise herself with a hoodie. The police arrested her that morning, charging her with vandalism, harassment, and criminal threatening. My parents called, begging me to drop the charges, but I refused. This had gone too far. Lisa spent a night in jail before my parents bailed her out. The conditions of her release included no contact with me, but I knew that wouldn't stop her. I installed security cameras around my property and changed all my locks. I varied my routine, taking different routes to work and shopping at different stores. The family divide deepened. Some relatives, seeing the evidence of Lisa's fraud and violence, switched sides. Others dug in deeper, insisting I must have provoked her somehow. Family gatherings became impossible. My mother stopped speaking to me entirely, while my father called occasionally to check on my safety. Lisa's ex-fiancé reached out again, offering to testify about her behavior if needed. He'd discovered more lies during their relationship ending, including credit cards she'd opened in his name and money she'd stolen from their joint savings. He was pursuing his own legal action against her. As the legal proceedings moved forward, Lisa's behavior became increasingly erratic. She created fake social media accounts to harass me, sent packages to my home with disturbing contents, and even tried to get me fired by making false complaints to my employer. Each action was documented, added to the growing pile of evidence against her. The GoFundMe was finally shut down after multiple reports of fraud. Donors began demanding refunds, and Lisa faced potential criminal charges for wire fraud. Her carefully crafted victim narrative was crumbling, and with it, her support system. One morning, I found Lisa waiting by my car in the office parking garage. She'd lost weight, her designer clothes replaced by wrinkled sweats. Her perfectly styled hair hung limp around her face. She begged me to drop everything, promising to repay the money, to apologize publicly, to get therapy. I walked past her to my car, but she grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my skin as she pleaded, then threatened, then pleaded again. Security cameras recorded everything. When I finally pulled free and got in my car, she pounded on the windows, screaming that I'd ruined her life. That encounter led to her arrest for violating the restraining order. This time, my parents didn't bail her out immediately. My mother called, sobbing, saying she didn't recognize her daughter anymore. I felt a pang of sympathy, but reminded myself that Lisa had always been this person. The wedding had just revealed it. The preliminary hearing for the criminal charges arrived. I sat in the courthouse, surrounded by my lawyer and the few family members who still supported me. Lisa entered in handcuffs, her lawyer beside her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of her actions. The prosecutor presented the evidence: the vandalism, the threats, the harassment, the fraud. Lisa's lawyer tried to paint her as a stressed bride who'd made poor choices, but the pattern of behavior was too clear to dismiss. The judge set a trial date and maintained the restraining order. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Lisa's story had gained gained local attention, not the sympathetic coverage she'd wanted, but as a cautionary tale about wedding obsession and fraud. Why does Lisa keep pushing things when she's clearly caught? The fake social media accounts, the disturbing packages, trying to get her sister fired. Each move seems more desperate than the last, like she can't accept that her plan fell apart. I declined to comment, walking quickly to my car while Lisa's lawyer gave a statement about his client's innocence. The civil lawsuit proceeded parallel to the criminal case. Lisa's countersuit was dismissed quickly given the evidence. My defamation and fraud claims moved forward. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, but I refused. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about accountability. Discovery revealed more disturbing facts. Lisa had been planning to use me for months before the engagement, telling friends she'd found her wedding piggy bank. She'd researched the most expensive vendors specifically because she knew I'd pay. The cruelty had been calculated, designed to keep me off balance and compliant. My lawyer also uncovered a pattern of similar behavior in Lisa's past. Former friends came forward with stories of money borrowed and never repaid, events ruined by her need for attention, relationships destroyed by her manipulations. I'd been the latest in a long line of victims, just the first to fight back. As the trials approached, Lisa made one last desperate attempt. She posted a video online, tearfully apologizing and taking responsibility for everything. She claimed to have found religion, to be in therapy, to want to make amends. The performance was convincing to those who didn't know her, but I'd learned to see through her acts. The apology came with subtle digs at me, implications that I'd overreacted, suggestions that a loving sister would have forgiven her. She announced she was writing a book about the experience, positioning herself as a reformed bridezilla who'd learned valuable lessons. My lawyer immediately sent a cease and desist regarding the book, citing the ongoing legal proceedings and defamation concerns. Lisa responded by claiming I was trying to silence her story of redemption. The social media battle resumed, though with less support for her this time. The criminal trial began on a rainy Monday. I testified about the harassment, the vandalism, the threats. The prosecutor presented the security footage, the messages, the pattern of escalation. Lisa's defense relied on painting her as a woman pushed to the brink by wedding stress and family betrayal. During cross-examination, her lawyer tried to make me seem vindictive for canceling the wedding contracts. I calmly explained that I'd simply withdrawn my financial support after learning I was being used. I played the recording of Lisa's cruel words, watching the jury's faces harden as they heard her real feelings about me. Lisa took the stand in her own defense, crying prettily as she spun her tale of woe. But under cross-examination, her story fell apart. She couldn't explain the fraud, the vandalism, the threats. Her tears turned to anger as the prosecutor pressed her, and glimpses of her true nature showed through. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Lisa's face went white as the verdict was read. She looked at me across the courtroom, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. The civil trial followed shortly after. With the criminal conviction established, Lisa had little defense against my claims. The judge awarded damages for defamation and fraud, though I knew I'd likely never see the money. Lisa had spent everything on her lifestyle and legal fees. More importantly, the judge issued a permanent restraining order and required Lisa to publicly retract her false statements about me. She had to post apologies on all the same platforms where she'd spread lies, admitting to the fraud and harassment. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Sentencing day arrived with unexpected drama. Lisa's lawyer presented character witnesses and psychological evaluations, arguing for probation. The prosecutor pushed for jail time given the escalation and lack of remorse. I gave a victim impact statement, describing how Lisa's actions had affected every aspect of my life. In the end, the judge sentenced Lisa to 18 months in jail, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. She also ordered restitution for the damages and mandatory therapy. Lisa sobbed as they led her away in handcuffs, still playing the victim even then. My parents were devastated. My mother blamed me for not being more forgiving, for letting things escalate to criminal charges. My father was more understanding, but still grieved for the daughter he thought he'd raised. Our relationship might never fully recover. Some family members reached out to apologize for believing Lisa's lies. Others remained convinced I'd overreacted. I learned to live with the divided family, focusing on the relationships that had survived the test. My cousin Nathan became a closer friend through the ordeal. Lisa's ex-fiancé and I occasionally exchanged emails, both of us processing the trauma of discovering who she really was. He'd started therapy to understand how he'd missed the signs. I did the same, working through years of manipulation I'd previously dismissed as sibling dynamics. 6 months into her sentence, Lisa began sending letters through her lawyer. They were carefully worded to avoid violating the restraining order, but still managed to convey her hatred. She blamed me for everything, from her incarceration to her ruined reputation. I forwarded them to my lawyer and didn't respond. The wedding date that had started everything came and went quietly. I spent it at home, looking through old photos of Lisa and me as children. Before the competition, before the manipulation, before she'd learned to see me as a resource rather than a sister. I mourned the relationship we'd never really had. Life slowly returned to a new normal. The security cameras came down as the hypervigilance faded. I stopped checking over my shoulder constantly. Work colleagues stopped whispering when I walked by. The scandal became old news, replaced by other dramas. But the experience had changed me fundamentally. I'd learned to recognize manipulation, to set boundaries, to value myself beyond what I could provide for others. The thousands I'd lost on wedding deposits seemed a small price for those lessons. I started volunteering with a domestic violence organization, sharing my story with others who'd been financially and emotionally abused by family members. Many were surprised to learn that abuse didn't always come from romantic partners, that family could be just as damaging. A year after the trials, I received word that Lisa had been released early for good behavior. The restraining order remained in effect, but I still felt anxious. I increased my security measures and alerted my workplace, but weeks passed without incident. Then I learned through family gossip that Lisa had moved across the country, claiming she needed a fresh start where nobody knew her story. She'd legally changed her name and was working at a small boutique. Part of me hoped she'd genuinely learned and changed. The larger part remained skeptical. My mother finally reached out, asking to meet for coffee. We sat awkwardly in a cafe, both unsure how to bridge the gap Lisa had created between between us. She admitted she'd always known Lisa could be difficult, but had hoped marriage would settle her down. She apologized for not protecting me from my sister's worst impulses. It was a start, though our relationship would never be the same. Too much had been said and done. But we began having monthly lunches, carefully avoiding the topic of Lisa, while rebuilding what we could of our mother-daughter bond. The financial recovery took longer than the emotional one. Between legal fees and lost deposits, I'd spent nearly $40,000. Insurance covered some of the vandalism damage, and I'd eventually receive partial restitution, but the bulk was simply gone. I rebuilt my savings slowly, more cautious now about how I spent money on others. Dating became complicated. How do you explain to someone new that your sister is in jail because of a wedding dispute? When do you mention the restraining order, the fraud, the year of harassment? I learned to be upfront about having a complicated family situation while saving details for those who earned my trust. Work improved once the drama died down. My boss, who'd initially been concerned about the disruptions, became supportive after understanding the full situation. Colleagues who distanced themselves during the scandal gradually warmed up again. Professional life stabilized, but the hardest part was learning to trust again. Every new friendship, every family interaction, every generous gesture from others was filtered through suspicion. Was I being used? Were there hidden motives? Therapy helped, but the wariness lingered. 2 years after everything began, I received a final communication through legal channels. Lisa had written a letter taking full responsibility for her actions, acknowledging the pain she'd caused, and promising to respect the restraining order forever. Her lawyer confirmed she wasn't seeking anything in return, just closure. I read the letter multiple times, searching for hidden meanings or manipulation, but it seemed genuine, or at least as genuine as Lisa could manage. I didn't respond, but I kept the letter. Maybe someday I'd believe she'd changed, maybe not. The extended family eventually found a new equilibrium. Holiday gatherings split into 2 camps, those who maintained relationships with both Lisa and me, and those who chose sides. I attended the ones I was welcome at and made my own traditions for the others. Friends who'd stood by me through everything became even closer. They'd seen me at my worst, dealing with public humiliation and private pain, and hadn't wavered. Those relationships deepened in ways that might not have happened without the crisis. I also found unexpected support from others who dealt with toxic family members. Online communities, support groups, and casual conversations revealed how common these dynamics were. Lisa's lawyer presenting character witnesses for someone who vandalized property takes some serious nerve, like asking for a good review after burning down the restaurant because the soup was cold. I wasn't alone in having a family member who saw me as a resource to exploit. The wedding industry stories were particularly resonant. So many people had similar tales of family members expecting them to fund elaborate celebrations they couldn't afford. The pressure to maintain family harmony while being financially drained was a common theme. 3 years later, I could finally think about the experience without anger consuming me. The scars remained, but they'd become part of my story rather than defining it. I'd learned to set boundaries, to value myself, to recognize manipulation before it went too far. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd just stayed silent that day at Lisa's apartment. If I'd accepted my demotion to regular guest and continued paying for everything. Would the wedding have happened? Would the truth have eventually come out anyway? But those were pointless questions. I'd made my choice when I heard her cruel words, when I realized I was nothing but a wallet to her. Everything that followed had been her choice to escalate rather than accept responsibility. I'd simply refused to be her victim anymore. The financial lessons stuck with me. I still helped family and friends when needed, but with clear boundaries and expectations. Gifts were gifts, not obligations. Loans came with written agreements, and I never again put someone else's dreams ahead of my own financial security. Professional therapy had taught me to recognize the patterns of our childhood that had set up this dynamic. Lisa had learned early that tears and tantrums got her what she wanted. I'd learned that being helpful and generous earned approval. We'd both played our assigned roles until I'd finally broken the script. The restraining order remained a strange comfort. Just knowing it existed, that there were legal consequences if Lisa tried to contact me, provided peace of mind. I'd never wanted our relationship to end with legal documents, but I'd accepted it as necessary protection. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would mention seeing Lisa's social media under her new name. She apparently portrayed herself as a life coach, helping others overcome their mistakes. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I hoped her clients benefited even if the transformation was partly performance. My own social media remained private, limited to actual friends and family I trusted. The experience of having my life dissected by strangers had cured me of any desire for public attention. Privacy felt like a luxury I'd never again take for granted. Work emotions came easier once I'd learned to advocate for myself. The skills developed in standing up to Lisa translated to professional confidence. I negotiated better salaries, took on leadership roles, and stopped undervaluing my contributions. Dating eventually became easier too. I found someone who understood complicated families, who didn't judge me for the restraining order against my sister. He had his own family challenges, and we bonded over learning to set boundaries with people we loved but couldn't trust. The wedding deposit money I'd recovered went into a house down payment instead. It felt like poetic justice, using funds meant for Lisa's dream wedding to build my own dreams. The house was small but mine, a sanctuary where I controlled who entered. Family gatherings grew less tense as years passed. Those who'd chosen sides initially began to soften, realizing relationships didn't have to be all or nothing. I could attend a cousin's birthday where Lisa might be discussed without it ruining my day. My mother and I found our new rhythm. We talked about books, gardening, anything except Lisa. She'd mention her occasionally, careful not to push, and I'd listen without engaging. It was a delicate balance, but it worked for us. The volunteer work with abuse survivors became a regular part of my life. Sharing my story helped others recognize their own toxic situations. Financial abuse by family members was more common than most people realized, hidden by shame and family loyalty. 5 years after that fateful day at Lisa's apartment, I finally felt truly free. The hypervigilance had faded to normal caution. The anger had transformed into understanding. The pain had become wisdom. I'd survived and rebuilt, stronger for the experience. Looking at my life now, I sometimes felt grateful for what had happened, not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the growth it had forced. I'd discovered strength I didn't know I had, learned to value myself beyond what I could provide for others. The girl who'd paid for everything to keep peace was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, set clear boundaries, and refused to be manipulated. It had been an expensive education, financially and emotionally, but invaluable in the long run. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wondered if Lisa ever thought about what she'd lost. Not the wedding or the money, but the sister who'd loved her despite everything. The one person who'd always been there until she'd pushed too far. But those thoughts never lingered long. My life had moved forward while hers had imploded. I'd built genuine relationships while she'd burned bridges. I'd found peace while she'd found consequences. The best revenge, I'd learned, was simply living well and refusing to let her actions define my future. The wedding that never was had taught me more than any ceremony could have. About family, about self-worth, about the difference between love and exploitation. Lisa had wanted a perfect wedding at any cost. Instead, she'd given me the gift of freedom from her manipulation. And that, I realized as I looked around my peaceful home at the life I'd built, was worth more than any wedding could ever be. The price had been high, paid in family division and public humiliation, but the return was immeasurable. Self-respect, genuine relationships, and the knowledge that I'd never again sacrifice myself for someone who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. The story that had begun with wedding planning texts demanding payment had ended with something far more valuable than money could buy. The courage to say no, the strength to stand firm, and the wisdom to know that real love never demands you diminish yourself for someone else's dreams. Lisa had taught me that, though certainly not in the way she'd intended. The morning after Lisa's release, I woke to find a package on my doorstep. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, sat my grandmother's jewelry box that had gone missing during one of her tantrums at my house. A single note tucked inside read, "Starting fresh." I turned the box over in my hands, checking for damage. The lock was broken, and several pieces were missing, including the pearl necklace our grandmother had worn at her own wedding. I photographed everything and forwarded it to my lawyer, who confirmed this technically violated the restraining order, but advised against pursuing it unless the behavior escalated. 2 weeks later, my cousin Nathan called with disturbing news. Lisa had contacted him through a mutual friend, asking him to arrange a meeting with me. She claimed to have information about our grandmother's estate that I needed to know. Nathan had refused, but she'd persisted, even offering him money to set up an accidental encounter. I increased my vigilance, varying my routines even more. The grocery store I'd shopped at for years became off-limits after the cashier mentioned someone matching Lisa's description, asking about my shopping schedule. I switched gyms when my trainer received calls inquiring about my workout times. My mother's birthday approached, creating the first real test of our fractured family dynamics. She wanted both daughters there, despite everything. I agreed to attend the early celebration, knowing Lisa would come to the evening one. But plans changed when my mother fell ill the morning of her birthday. I rushed to the hospital, finding my father in the waiting room. My mother had collapsed at breakfast, and tests were being run. We sat in tense silence until the doctor emerged with good news. Just a reaction to new medication. Nothing serious. She'd be released within hours. As we waited for discharge papers, Lisa appeared in the doorway. My father had called her without thinking. She froze when she saw me, then approached our father, ignoring my presence completely. I gathered my things to leave, but my mother's weak voice called from the room, asking for both her daughters. The next 20 minutes passed in excruciating tension. Lisa sat on one side of the bed, me on the other, both focused solely on our mother. When the nurse came with discharge instructions, I volunteered to handle the pharmacy run, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. At the pharmacy, I found Lisa's ex-fiancé waiting in line. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him. The stress lines around his eyes faded. We chatted briefly while waiting. He'd started his own business, moved to a new apartment, and was dating someone who appreciated honesty. He mentioned Lisa had tried contacting him recently, but he'd blocked her immediately. I returned to find the hospital room empty except for my father. Lisa had left abruptly after receiving a phone call, claiming a work emergency. My mother was disappointed but unsurprised. We drove her home in silence, the unspoken weight of our divided family hanging heavy in the car. Over the following weeks, Lisa's attempts to circumvent the restraining order intensified. She created elaborate schemes to force contact. A fake charity called claiming I'd pledged a donation in Lisa's name. A wedding photographer contacted me about a booking Lisa had made for a sibling reconciliation photo shoot. Each attempt was documented and forwarded to my lawyer. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lisa's former roommate from college reached out through social media. The grandmother's jewelry box showing up with missing pieces and a broken lock? That starting fresh note feels more like testing boundaries than any real change. Why return something damaged after holding on to it all this time? She'd seen news coverage of the trial and wanted to share her own experience. Lisa had pulled similar schemes throughout college, using roommates' credit cards, faking emergencies for money, always playing the victim when caught. The roommate provided documentation from their time living together, including police reports from when Lisa had stolen and sold her laptop, then claimed it was a misunderstanding. There were text messages showing the same manipulation patterns, the same calculated cruelty hidden beneath a sweet exterior. I shared this information with my therapist, who helped me understand the patterns better. Lisa's behavior wasn't really about me. I'd simply been the most convenient target with the most resources. The realization brought a strange kind of peace. Her cruelty wasn't personal, it was pathological. My workplace implemented new security measures after Lisa was spotted in the parking garage multiple times. Security cameras showed her trying different disguises, wigs, sunglasses, even a fake pregnancy belly once. Each incident was reported, building a case for extended restraining order violations. The family dynamics shifted again when my Aunt Catherine, who'd initially condemned me, experienced Lisa's manipulation firsthand. Lisa had approached her for a loan, spinning a tale about needing money for therapy to repair our relationship. When Catherine offered to pay the therapist directly, Lisa's story fell apart. Catherine called me in tears, apologizing for not believing me. She'd given Lisa $3,000 before discovering the therapy story was fake. When she'd confronted Lisa, she'd experienced the same rage and threats I'd endured. Catherine filed her own police report, adding to Lisa's growing legal troubles. Nathan organized a family meeting at his house, inviting everyone except Lisa. About half the family showed up. He presented a timeline of Lisa's behavior going back to childhood, incidents we'd all dismissed or excused. The pattern was undeniable when laid out systematically. Some family members remained in denial, insisting we were ganging up on Lisa, but others began sharing their own stories. Money borrowed and never returned, lies told to cover up theft, always with Lisa as the victim of circumstances. The meeting ended with most agreeing to maintain boundaries with Lisa for everyone's protection. My mother struggled most with the family division. She developed stress-related health issues, her blood pressure spiking whenever Lisa's name came up. My father finally put his foot down, insisting they needed to accept that Lisa had chosen her path. The arguments I overheard during visits were heartbreaking. Lisa's escalation reached a dangerous peak when she somehow obtained a key to my house. I came home from work to find things subtly moved. A picture frame turned, books rearranged, my coffee mug placed in the wrong cabinet. Nothing stolen, just enough to let me know she'd been there. The locksmith came that night, installing new high-security locks. The security company upgraded my system with motion sensors and immediate police notification. I stayed with friends for a week while additional measures were implemented, including reinforced windows and a panic button. The police took the break-in seriously given Lisa's history. They increased patrols in my neighborhood and advised me to consider temporary relocation, but I refused to be driven from my home. This was my sanctuary, and I wouldn't let her take that too. Lisa's mistakes began compounding. The boutique where she worked discovered discrepancies in the register that traced back to her. She was fired and faced potential charges. Her new apartment complex evicted her for violating lease terms by subletting without permission. The carefully constructed new life was crumbling. Through the family grapevine, I learned she'd been hospitalized briefly for what relatives euphemistically called exhaustion. The truth Nathan discovered was that she'd been placed on psychiatric hold after a public meltdown at a bank where she'd been denied a loan. The spiral was accelerating. My therapist helped me process the conflicting emotions. Part of me felt guilty watching Lisa's complete destruction, even though I'd only defended myself. Another part remained angry at the years of manipulation. The largest part just felt tired, wanting it all to be over. The restraining order violation charges from the break-in finally stuck. Lisa was arrested at a motel where she'd been staying under a fake name. This time, bail was denied due to her pattern of violations. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out. I used those 6 weeks to solidify my boundaries and protection. A lawyer helped me establish a trust that would protect my assets from any future schemes. I changed jobs, finding a position with better security and understanding management. The fresh start felt liberating. My relationship with my parents stabilized as they accepted the reality of Lisa's choices. Sunday dinners resumed, though with an unspoken agreement not to discuss Lisa beyond necessary legal updates. We found other topics: their garden, my father's retirement plans, anything but the daughter who'd torn our family apart. The second trial was briefer than the first. Lisa's pattern of violations was clear, documented extensively. Her lawyer argued for mental health treatment instead of incarceration, but the judge noted she'd had opportunities for treatment and had chosen continued harassment instead. Lisa received an additional year in prison for the violations, to be served consecutively with her remaining sentence. The judge also extended the restraining order to lifetime, with severe penalties for any violation. As they led her away, Lisa stared at me with hollow eyes. The fight had finally gone out of her. The family's reaction was muted this time. Even her staunchest defenders couldn't argue with the evidence. My mother cried quietly at home while my father held her. The dream of reconciling her daughters died with that second conviction. I focused on rebuilding what Lisa had tried to destroy. Friendships were renewed with people who distanced themselves during the chaos. Professional relationships strengthened as I proved my reliability and competence. Dating remained complicated, but became possible with the right person who understood family trauma. 6 months passed peacefully. The hypervigilance faded to normal caution. Sleep came easier without fearing what morning might bring. I even started traveling again, something I'd avoided while Lisa was free and unpredictable. Then came unexpected news. Lisa had been injured in a prison altercation. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough for hospitalization. My parents agonized over visiting her. I supported whatever decision brought them peace, though I maintained my own boundaries. They went once, returning shaken. Lisa had blamed me for the attack, claiming I'd somehow orchestrated it from outside. The delusion was complete. My parents didn't visit again, finally accepting that their daughter was beyond their help. Work flourished as I channeled energy previously spent on defense into productivity. A promotion came with increased responsibility and visibility. I accepted, no longer afraid of success attracting Lisa's attention. The restraining order and her incarceration provided a shield I trusted. The volunteer work with domestic abuse survivors expanded. I began speaking at support groups, sharing how family members could be abusers too. Many found comfort knowing they weren't alone in having relatives who saw them as resources to exploit rather than people to love. A year into Lisa's second sentence, I received a letter through official channels. Prison authorities had screened it, confirming it contained no threats or violations. Inside, Lisa had written 2 words: "I'm sorry, nothing more." I stared at those words, searching for hidden meaning or manipulation. But sometimes the simplest explanation is truth. Maybe she was sorry. Maybe prison had finally broken through her delusions. Or maybe it was just another manipulation. I'd never know, and I realized I didn't need to. The letter went into a file with all the other documentation, not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. From the girl who'd paid for everything to keep peace to a woman who knew her worth and defended it. The transformation had been painful but necessary. My mother's health improved as stress decreased. She found peace in accepting she'd done her best with Lisa, even if the outcome wasn't what she'd hoped. We grew closer through shared grief over the daughter and sister we'd lost to her own choices. Friends who'd weathered the storm with me became chosen family. We celebrated holidays together, creating new traditions free from the tension of managing Lisa's behavior. The gatherings were smaller but filled with genuine warmth instead of underlying dread. Professional success continued building. The skills developed through surviving Lisa, documentation, boundary setting, pattern recognition, translated perfectly to business leadership. I mentored younger colleagues, especially those dealing with difficult family situations affecting their work. 2 years after the second conviction, I met someone special at a conference. He understood complicated families, having his own challenging sibling relationships. We bonded over learning to protect ourselves while still remaining open to love. The relationship developed slowly but steadily. My cousin Nathan remained a close ally. We often reflected on how Lisa's actions had inadvertently brought parts of the family closer. Those who'd stood together through the crisis formed stronger bonds than before. Silver linings in the storm clouds. The house I'd protected so fiercely became a gathering place for the family members who'd supported me. Holiday dinners, birthday celebrations, casual weekend barbecues, all the normal family events Lisa had tried to destroy. Life had routed around the damage she'd caused. As Lisa's release date approached again, I prepared calmly this time. The lifetime restraining order provided protection. My support system was solid. Security measures were routine now, not panic responses. I'd built a life she couldn't destroy with her chaos. The day came and went without incident. Lisa was released to a halfway house in another state, part of her parole conditions. She had to maintain distance, undergo mandatory therapy, and submit to regular monitoring. The system had finally recognized the danger she posed. My parents chose not to maintain contact with her. The decision brought them pain, but also relief. They focused on the family relationships that brought joy rather than constant crisis. We all learned to speak of Lisa in past tense, a ghost who'd once haunted our lives. Life settled into peaceful rhythms. Work challenges were manageable compared to what I'd survived. Relationship conflicts seemed minor after navigating Lisa's manipulations. I'd developed perspective through fire, emerging stronger and wiser. The financial recovery was complete. Between insurance settlements and careful saving, I'd rebuilt beyond what Lisa had cost me. But the real wealth was in lessons learned, the value of boundaries, the importance of documentation, the strength found in standing firm. I sometimes wondered if Lisa ever truly understood what she'd lost. Not just money or family support, but the sister who would have given her anything out of love, not manipulation. The wedding she'd wanted so desperately had cost her everything in pursuit of perfection built on lies. But those wonderings were brief, quickly replaced by gratitude for the life I'd built. Strong friendships, meaningful work, healthy family relationships with those who'd chosen truth over enabling. Lisa had tried to destroy me for refusing to fund her dreams. Instead, she'd freed me to build my own. The story that began with wedding demands had become one of survival and growth. Every attempt to break me had only revealed strength I didn't know existed. Lisa had wanted a perfect wedding at any cost. The cost had been everything, but not in the way she'd planned. Looking back, I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only relief that it was over. She'd chosen her path with every escalation, every violation, every refusal to accept responsibility. I'd simply refused to walk it with her anymore. That refusal had saved my life in ways I was still discovering. The girl who'd sat at her kitchen table canceling wedding contracts had evolved into a woman who knew her worth. The journey between those 2 points had been brutal but necessary. Lisa had been the catalyst, though certainly not the way she'd intended. Now, surrounded by genuine love and chosen family, I rarely thought of her at all. The restraining order sat filed away, a paper shield I no longer actively needed. The best protection was the life I'd built, too full of real joy to leave room for her chaos. Sometimes at family gatherings, there would be a moment of silence where Lisa's absence was felt, but it would pass quickly, filled with laughter and conversation from those who'd chosen love over manipulation. We'd learned to be complete without her. The wedding that never was had taught invaluable lessons about family bonds versus trauma bonds, about the difference between helping and enabling, about the strength found in saying no. Lisa had demanded I fund her perfect day. Instead, I'd funded my perfect life, one built on truth, boundaries, and self-respect. That was the real ending to our story, not with dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation, but with peaceful distance. She lived her life under court supervision in another state. I lived mine surrounded by people who valued me for more than what I could provide. The price of freedom from her manipulation had been high. Family division, legal battles, years of fear, but the reward was immeasurable. A life lived on my own terms, relationships based on mutual respect, and the knowledge that I'd never again sacrifice my well-being for someone else's demands. In the end, Lisa had given me an unexpected gift. By showing me the worst of what family could be, she'd taught me to recognize and cherish the best. The wedding she'd planned to showcase her perfect life had instead revealed her true nature. And in defending myself against that revelation, I'd discovered my own. Well, that was something, huh? Appreciate you sticking around while I tried to make sense of all this. It's been a weird one, but weird in the best way. Catch you in the next one.